Okay, so we're in the middle of a letter. This letter is a little bit academic, which you may have picked up, but it's a very important letter because there is a strong psychological element that is really at the core of it, even though it is more of a philosophical, intellectual letter. And it's discussing, we began discussing, someone asked the Rebbe the question of proof of existence of God. Can we prove the existence of God? And the points that the Rebbe made until now is that the Rebbe is building a demonstration of multiple layers, demonstrating that when people say they want proof for anything, the question that we need to ask before we offer a proof is, what is a valid proof? And he demonstrates that the reason why this question is very important is because the reality is that most often people actually do not wait for a proof to make different decisions in their life, and they base much of their life on things which they have not proven for themselves or are not concretely proven. So interestingly, by way of example, when people speak about the Torah and they want to know if the Torah is true, they're very often they're seeking empirical proof. Empirical proof means proof that you can literally demonstrate physically to them, right? And that is a level of proof that is practically never expected or required by the same person for almost anything else in their life. So why is it that suddenly they are insisting on empirical proof? So, and the Rebbe first demonstrates that we don't do that. And not only do we not do that, science doesn't do that. Science does not require empirical proof. And so he says, for example, let's begin with a child. A child often only, people think anyway that children only trust or believe in what they see, right? Now, actually, that's not true at all. Children are the most faithful of humanity. They have a tremendous faith. But then the Rebbe goes to the color of magenta to a blind person. Does a blind person, if you ask a blind person, do you believe that there is the color magenta? Well, they're going to say, most likely, yes. How do you know? Because everyone tells me that. Now, they've never seen it. So this is the first step, the smallest step the Rebbe takes away from empirical proof to demonstrate that we don't need to see something to know it to be. We know it to be without questioning it because many people tell us that, even if we ourselves cannot see it. Then the Rebbe jumps to another level and he says, what about electrical power? Can you see an electrical current? No one can see an electrical current. But we know that when I flip the switch on to let the electrical current flow through, suddenly my appliance works. We call that cause and effect. And in the world of science, cause and effect is a very legitimate and completely relied upon way of determining a fact, a reality. The Rebbe says, however, that electrical power, even though you can't see it, you can feel it. You can get an electrical shock, right? So there are ways, and you can measure it. There are tools to measure the strength of the electricity, right? So we do have other ways, although not as concrete, maybe, as sight, which is probably the most concrete way of knowing something. But we have very clear, solid, valid ways of knowing that there is an electrical current. Then the Rebbe goes to another level. And the next level, which I'm not sure that we did last week, I don't think so, is gravity. And I'm just going to say as well, I'll just let you know that we're going to get to a level which really is beyond me, because I'm not a scientist. But I think we can all have enough understanding about to really get the point that the Rebbe is making, which we're going to get to. But let's go now to, we're on page 18, where it said in the middle paragraph, the third paragraph, as with gravity. Or actually, let's go to the second paragraph. anyone in the exact sciences who now let me explain to you, all part of me keeping you fully engaged in the value of this letter, is that people, you may ask, like, how do we in fact know there is God? And you may not ask. You may just you may be comfortable trusting and believing that there is God, but you may encounter other people who are going to ask you that. That's people's first go-to as their way out. Like, why should I do this? How do you even know there's a God? So now, this whole long conversation the Rebbe is having is for someone who can be intellectually honest. Many people you won't be able to have this whole letter conversation with, but it's good for you to know what angle is necessary in order to assist them and where their obstacle is. And often the obstacle is not the proof that they're demanding. Just because someone is asking for proof doesn't mean that is their obstacle to God. Very often it's a completely different obstacle, and that's a lot of what we're going to get out of this letter. So anyone in the exact sciences who wonders whether the existence of the Creator can be reliably proven should consider another standard concept derived from the realm of physics. This idea is so intellectually challenging that after many decades of study, even the experts admit it is beyond their comprehension. So the Rebbe is going to show in science a concept that is accepted as standard. Everyone agrees with it. You'll know that when we get to it, which is gravity. Yet it's way beyond our comprehension to explain. Nonetheless, it is accepted by all exact scientists as a reality, and it is a proven fact in the eyes of the public. Everyone agrees that this reality exists. The idea referred to is that matter is nothing. I'm sorry, just a moment. I'm going to paraphrase instead of going back. I want to paraphrase first. With the one other point that the Rebbe made was gravity that we discussed last week, and I'm going to continue reading this. Gravity is beyond electricity. Gravity is just something that we know that if I hold this up and I drop it, it's going to fall. Why is it going to fall? It's going to fall because of gravity, of the law of gravity. What is the energy that is pulling this thing down? Does anyone know? Can anyone explain it? No one can explain exactly how gravity works. We don't even feel anything. Like you feel an electrical current, you don't feel anything in the air that's pulling things down. We have no way of measuring like that pull of gravity. We have equations of mass times whatever, I don't know all of these things, but to measure how fast it might fall. But we have no way of measuring the actual pull, the force called gravity. We just know that whenever you hold something, it will fall. So this is even less concrete than electricity, and yet everyone across the world, there isn't a single person that will deny the reality of gravity. And now the Rebbe is going to beyond that to a more advanced level, which is really beyond my comprehension, but I have some vague understandings about it. And that is the idea, I'm in the middle of the second paragraph on page 18. The idea referred to is that matter is nothing but a particular form of energy. Matter, physical mass, is actually really only another form of energy. We think it's something solid, right? So there's something solid here. Actually, it's just energy. And that it is possible to transform matter into energy and energy to matter. And actually, you can transform it into raw energy, and you can transform energy into matter, which is a little bit beyond my education in science. But superficially, it may be hard to see what is so difficult about this notion of relativity. However, if one takes a moment to consider the degree of similarity between the light now emanating from his bulb and the shoe on his foot. In other words, the Rebbe is using an example of something which is very much energy, like light, which is not tangible at all. The light that fills your room is not tangible at all, versus the shoe on your foot, which is very concrete and tangible. And then he tries to imagine converting one into the other and back again. The problem becomes crystal clear. All of a sudden we see what? How can you say such a thing? At the same time, science knows this to be a fact. Everything in our experience leads us to think that matter and energy are as fundamentally different as two things can be. Therefore, to say that they are equivalent does not even sound, say, reasonable but difficult. It sounds completely ridiculous. It doesn't even sound reasonable but just difficult to comprehend. It sounds completely ridiculous. You're talking about two things which are entirely different and you're saying they're the same thing. But that's what science agrees to. As with gravity, the only compelling proof for relativity is that we see events that have no apparent explanation, and if we accept the theory, they are explained. This is considered a scientific proof. That means, if we don't understand how something works, we have a theory that explains it, we have nothing disproving that theory becomes a scientific fact. And on this basis alone, relativity is accepted virtually everywhere as conclusively demonstrated beyond the faintest doubt. No one questions it at all, even though from a strictly rational standpoint, the equivalence of matter and energy is not at all compelling. So here's the point. Now the Rebbe is going to get to the big point. The big point is this. And the point the Rebbe is going to say, I'll just paraphrase briefly, is everyone in the world are believers. Everyone are believers. When I say believers, what do I mean? That we believe in things that we cannot prove. Everyone. It's just that religious people, the formally religious people, they believe certain things, and skeptics believe other things. But they're believers. It's not as if they know for a fact everything that they believe. They don't. People act in accordance with their beliefs. And skeptics are no different. Hence, it is reasonable to expect that a skeptic will feel free to use as a basis for action any ideas that are shown to meet his criteria of legitimacy. So basically, he sets up his own criteria for legitimacy. And then he says, if it fits my criteria, basically, if I'm comfortable with it, I believe it. If I'm not comfortable with it, I don't. And different people, based on the way they were raised and the way they were guided and the way they were taught, are comfortable with different things, right? A child who is raised with the belief of God is comfortable with the fact that there is a God in the universe, even though they can't show God to anybody, but they're totally comfortable with it. And no matter what you tell them, they're going to believe it. On this basis, there is not only one, but several proofs for the existence of God. And as mentioned, there is no problem if one is forced to say that this existence is not grasped by the senses or the mind, or even if it contradicts rationality. So the Rebbe says, basically, based on everything we just discussed, there are, in fact, a number of proofs that there is a God, based on, for example, what we said, cause and effect, or the same way we can measure electricity. There are ways of measuring that there is a higher being, which the Rebbe is going to demonstrate. And he says, on top of all of that, if one is forced to say that this existence is not grasped by the senses or the mind at all, such as gravity, or even more so, that matter is also energy, or even if it contradicts rationality, like matter being energy, which contradicts rationality. But yet we believe that. That is good reason to also believe in a God. As long as this existence accounts for observed reality and does so better than any other proposition. The Rebbe is saying from a scientific point of view, if God is the best theory that there is, we have what is usually considered to be conclusive scientific proof. Scientifically, that's considered to be proof. Now, I want to reiterate something. If you were to have a conversation with someone and they say they don't believe in God, most likely were you to break down all the steps of this letter to them, you would still not convince them. You know why? Because their belief that there isn't a God is not a rational belief. And therefore, a rational explanation will not help them. I suspect that this letter was written by someone who believes in God, but is looking for rational proof to use probably for others. And the Rebbe is giving it to him because he is a person who believes in God. He's not debating that. And the Rebbe is showing him, and like I think all of us will be able to whatever extent we can, understand all the points the Rebbe is making here. But I'm sharing with you practically that this is not necessarily the way to prove to someone that there is a God, because really their question is not an intellectual question, it's really an emotional question. Most people's relationship with God is more emotional than it is intellectual. And by the way, I'll say that human beings are dominated primarily emotionally, by emotions, not by intellect. Very few people make strong intellectual decisions in their life. It's heavily influenced by our emotions. So in this sense, proving the existence of the Creator is the same as proving anything else, whether in the realm of science or in the context of our daily lives. We're on page 19. Anyone who examines his daily conduct, here the Rebbe demonstrates how we interact with scientific proof. Anyone who examines his daily conduct will admit that he doesn't perform a penetrating, thorough analysis, assessing the reliability of the information on which he bases his daily activities. Basically, there are an endless number of daily activities that we do, which we've never verified to be sound. If the weather forecast calls for rain, he wears his boots, even though he has never met the weatherman or studied meteorology. And furthermore, he knows that the weatherman is often wrong. And still, our whole day is surrounded around the fact that it's going to rain. For another example, if vitamin E is reported to cure baldness, I wish it was that easy to cure baldness, he will take it without knowing for sure how it works or if it works. What happens? You take it. You don't have, right? So he'll take it without even knowing what it is. Rather, he accepts the words of others who did look into the matter. What is vitamin D? What is this vitamin? And how does this vitamin cure baldness? And how many people did it cure? Whatever it is, right? We immediately take it. In other words, the Rebbe is demonstrating the point I was making, and that is that we are not people who live on empirical proof or insist on empirical proof for our day-to-day living. And by the way, one of the powerful examples that he gave, that a person is going to take his umbrella with him because the meteorologist said it's going to rain. Or better yet, the vitamin E, that we're going to take the vitamin E without even knowing how it works, is exactly the way the previous Rebbe explained a person should approach Judaism. Right? If the creator of the universe says that a certain diet is what will make a Jewish soul thrive to fulfill its mission on this world, right? So am I going to wait until I can prove that that is true, right? Or am I going to immediately take it to help myself? And the Friedrich Rebbe, very strongly encouraged that we should. The first thing to do is to do what you need to do for yourself. You want to now you want to spend time studying to understand it. Knock yourself out. But we don't wait to do what we need to for ourselves until we understand it. The same way we don't wait to take a medicine when the doctor prescribes a medicine because we're ill. We don't say we're not taking it till I sit in school for a few years and study pharmacology. Only where there is some doubt that maybe the information was faked or that the observer was affected by internal or external factors, or that he wasn't sure himself and took someone else's view. Only when there's a crack where we see that there's something dishonest that's going on here, then one would seek additional evidence. And with every increase in the number of observers, the more people that observed that vitamin E cures baldness or whatever the story is, right? And with every type of variation in position, situation, and context relative to the observers, the likelihood of deception becomes more remote because we have more and more evidence. And the evidence is strengthened in the form of a scientific and convincing proof. On this basis, the individual and society engage in all kinds of activities and projects with complete trust that their conclusions are true and established. Think about it this way. Did you ever see someone that went out to watch a football game? You paid whatever it costs to go watch the Eagles, the great Eagles, and the quarterback's throwing the football. Did you ever get gripped by a fear that the football just may not fall? It may not fall, right? No, we have absolute faith in gravity because we know it to be a fact, and we know that because an endless number of people, an endless number of times, have thrown or dropped things, and they always fall, always. Right? So it's empirical to us. So the Rebbe is going to use this to demonstrate how true the Torah is. So too in our case, the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai was verified generation after generation as a fact proven by the presence of 600,000 adult males. The Torah tells us that when God gave the Torah to Moses at Mount Sinai, and God appeared at Mount Sinai, and God spoke to the entire Jewish people, there were 600,000 adult males, which means, the Rebbe will say, if one includes women, children, Levites, men over 60, all the people that are not included in this number of 600,000, there were present millions of individuals, including Egyptian immigrants, who saw the events with their own eyes and experienced divine communication personally and simultaneously. We assess that there were probably around 3 million people at Mount Sinai when God spoke, which also included every single member of the Jewish people at that time. That means every single Jew as a whole, and also 3 million individuals, all experienced and witnessed revelation of God. Not one person said after that experience, it didn't happen. I didn't experience that. They all experienced the exact same thing. By the way, I just want to note, we'll leave it at that. I won't note. So if one includes them, right? So there was present millions of individuals. So this is not a testimony restricted to a single prophet. The Rebbe is being refined here, and he's not comparing religions. But every other religion is founded on testimony by a single person or just a couple of people who claim they experienced the divine in some way. The Rebbe is saying this is not testimony restricted to a single prophet, a dreamer, or an elite group of people. This testimony was transmitted from parent to child, generation after generation. These 3 million Jews transmitted to their children that all of us, previous generation, witnessed this. And so their children, it was a fact that it happened. And they transmitted to their children, to their children, to their children. This testimony was transmitted from parent to child, generation after generation, and everyone acknowledges that there was no interruption in the transmission from then until now. Meaning that when you and I are told that the Torah was given by God at Mount Sinai, we are being told that by a generation before us, who were told it by a generation before them, back to the generation that actually witnessed it, where there wasn't a single individual that said another story other than I, one of the 3 million people, witnessed exactly that. Moreover, there have never been less than 600,000 reporters in any generation. In other words, there was never a generation where we had less than this number of people, of Jews. People whose characters were dissimilar and who were by no means afraid to disagree on basic issues, as is well documented from Sinai on. We know Jews, right? Jews argue all the time. And we're trained to argue. And even in Torah study, we're trained to debate. But this, no one debated. And we never had fewer than the original amount of people. We only had more people who all always testified to this fact. It was not debatable. It was so clear to everyone. Yet, despite all their differences and arguments, and despite their being dispersed throughout the world for millennia, all the versions of the above historical event are similar in every detail. Is there more reliable and precise testimony than this? Right? If we're going to believe in gravity, we're going to believe in the Torah. There is a second manner of proof, which is, so that's one, the Rebbe says that's one way of proving. There's a second manner of proof, in other words, that God revealed himself. The second manner of proof, which is also based on the premise above, that everything that happens has a cause, that seeing an event or a situation is proof positive that some guiding force exists, even if the event was apparently senseless or destructive. In other words, okay, so he says this proof is as follows. Consider any object. Virtually anything that one can imagine is composed of various parts that are arranged and coordinated with remarkable precision. None of the parts has any inherent control over the others, and yet we know that the harmonious and unified functioning of the entire system is itself a phenomenon and must be due to some cause. In other words, we can use many different things, but you can use your computer, which you're using right now, as an example. I don't think any of us can appreciate the endless number of details and of detailed items that go into the creating of a computer and the functioning of a computer. All of them have to work in perfect harmony. None of them actually are more powerful than another. It's just all set up in a way that everything works in perfect harmony. And so how does this happen? There must be something that caused this. Meaning, there must have been something beyond the computer that figured out that when you put all of these things together and you have them work in a certain way, they produce something magnificent. We conclude from this with complete confidence that there is an external power that binds and unifies all the parts. There's something extraneous to this thing itself. It's outside of it, greater than it, so it's able to create it and to put this all together. Moreover, the very fact that it binds and unifies the parts proves that it's stronger than they are since it controls them. The Rebbe uses a very simple example. I use this example in my bar mitzvah course for kids on the class about God. How do we know there's a God? I give them this exact example. Now you know where I got it from. For example, if we were to enter a factory where everything was run automatically and we did not see anyone there, I like to use the example because many people have seen this. I don't know if you have. If you've ever gone to a potato chip factory, sometimes they have, for visitors to come and see how potato chips are made, or any other type of a factory. I happen to have spent a lot of time in factories because I used to be a supervisor for the kosher for a kosher certification. You go into any of these factories and they have entire systems of processes where for food to be manufactured, where things are moved from one thing to the next until they're on a bottling belt where everything moves in precision, and the liquid, a certain amount of liquid is pumped into the bottle, and then another part of the machine puts the cap on it. It's really fascinating to always see. And so the Rebbe says, for example, if you enter a factory where everything was run automatically and we did not see anyone there, let's say there was no one there, we would not doubt the existence and involvement of a great mechanic whose knowledge encompassed all the machinery and component parts and who controlled them. One who is in charge of their functioning among themselves and who maintains the connection between the parts and the control center. Like, do we think that this factory that works in such perfect harmony to take raw material through an entire process, produce it, package it, box it, all done by machinery? Does anyone for a single moment think that this evolved? No, we know that all of this was put together by some very thoughtful person. On the contrary, the more concealed the hand of man in such a factory, and the more the operations are automated, the more impressed and convinced we are of the mechanics' remarkable skill. On the contrary, the less we see people involved, the more brilliant we know the mechanic who designed all of this is. And if this is the case with a factory, where we are speaking of hundreds, thousands, or even tens of thousands of parts, how much more true is this for natural objects? A piece of wood or stone, a plant or an animal, and needless to say, the structure of the human body. As Job states, from my flesh I will envision God. That when you look at a human body, you can know there is a God. This is especially so from the scientific perspective, that every object is comprised of billions of atoms, with each atom containing even more minute parts. One would think, at first glance, that chaos would reign and yield incomparable disorder, but instead we see an amazing orderliness and a marvelous fitting of the smaller parts to the larger, up to the very largest, as well as the integration of microcosmic and macrocosmic patterns and processes. It is therefore clear beyond any shadow of a doubt that there exists a mechanic responsible for all this. And this mechanic is with a capital M because it's God. They say that, I think today, that a human being is made up of something like 15, there are different numbers, but it's around this ballpark, 15 trillion cells. How much is a trillion? I don't know. Meaning, I know we can, it's 100 billion or whatever it is, but like my mind doesn't fathom that number. There's nothing I know of that to have 15 trillion cells, knowing that if one gets misaligned, it can throw the entire body into misalignment and make it very sick. So that means that if I think for a moment about the fact that I woke up today and I am a healthy person, I am a walking miracle. There's some miraculous being that orchestrates and has organized 15 trillion cells to work in harmony. And how can someone possibly say that there isn't a creator to this? So what I would say is, and what I do say is, someone who doesn't believe in God has far more faith than someone who believes in God. It takes more faith not to believe in God than it takes to believe in God. Because believing in God is reasonable. Not believing in God is completely unreasonable. Which means you got to be a person of unbelievable faith. And if this is, page 21. One might say that all this is governed according to the laws of nature. No, what God? There's nature. It's just a way that things operate. We know this is the nature of things. And the nature of a human being is to operate a certain way, and the cells operate that way. But I think it is important to emphasize that such expressions have no explanatory content. When someone says it's nature, what does that mean? What is nature? Because you saw this happen repeatedly, you call it nature. But what is nature? What is this force? Who's creating this force? But rather give a convenient summary or description of the existing situation. Basically, the Rebbe is saying this is just a shallow word to try and explain something without explaining it at all. That's what nature is. That is, it is true that natural phenomena are conducted according to definite patterns. But to say that a law of nature is a being in and of itself without dependence, that nature is itself a power, and that this being rules throughout the cosmos, and that there are thousands of beings like it according to the number of natural laws, it's so absurd that there is not one scientist in the field who would say so. Rather, it is the case that such laws are merely convenient. In other words, when we say laws of nature, we're basically saying, I don't know how this works and what makes it work. But I know this is how it works because it works all the time repeatedly, or most of the time repeatedly. That's what laws of nature are. When we say nature, the law, nature, it's not an explanation for anything. It is only a way of us framing something so we can talk about it. That the way this operates is this way, so we call it its nature. Rather, in this case, such laws are merely convenient summary expressions for describing a situation, so that one should not be forced to duplicate at every turn a lengthy description of the simple facts. But however elegant and sophisticated a law of nature may be, it is clear and obvious that such an expression provides no explanation whatsoever. That doesn't explain why it works this way. Nature is just saying how it works. Now to the heart of the matter. To put it plainly, everyone has criteria for what can be reliably considered true. If an idea meets those standards, it is fit to be believed and acted upon. So we all have our criteria. And when we meet our criteria, then it's true. If it does not, then it is not suitable for belief or as a basis for action. If it doesn't meet my criteria, I'm not going to act upon it. But one may not adopt certain truth criteria when it is convenient and then drop them when it is not. But if someone wants to be honest, you have to be consistent. Your criteria has to remain the same across the board. You can't say, for this I have this criteria, for that I have that criteria, to determine the truth of something. Therefore, it is assumed that anyone who is seeking a proof is not merely doing so for the sake of intellectual exercise, but would indeed live by his conclusions. So we would think then that someone hopefully is being intellectually honest. They have a consistent, they have a consistent criteria for truth, and if the criteria demonstrate a certain truth, then they are going to indeed live based on these conclusions. In this regard, it should be noted that the aforementioned proof is much stronger than all those proofs and evidence by which people conduct their daily lives. Basically, the Rebbe is saying that the proof that there is a God that we just demonstrated is far stronger than what we base most things in our life on. And here the Rebbe uses a very simple example. What simpler illustration is there than the fact that when retiring at night, one arranges everything for the morning, even though there is no logical proof that tomorrow morning the sun will rise yet again, and that all natural systems will continue to function as they did yesterday and the day before. Basically, when we go to sleep at night, we go to sleep with thoughts, plans, and even maybe arranged. Maybe we put breakfast out on the table. Maybe we set our clothing up. Whatever it is, we do different things well with the assumption, the clear assumption without a shadow of a hesitation that tomorrow morning is another day and I'm going to be doing these things. However, the Rebbe says, the fact that there is the nature of the sun rising every day doesn't help us understand what's compelling the sun to rise every day. It's just that we know that that is the nature. And therefore, it's very likely that it won't. And in fact, that's true. From a religious point of view, that's true. Literally, God, every single moment, is having the sun move, is deciding for the sun to move. The reason why it looks natural is because God is doing it consistently. Yet, we all do that. Every single one of us plans for tomorrow before we go to sleep the night before. That means that our criteria for evidence of something is not as strong as we like to make it be. Just a moment. Just finding the place. It is only that since the world has been working this way for so many days and years, one trusts that these laws will also rule tomorrow and the next day. And on this basis alone, a person strives and troubles himself to prepare his affairs for the following morning, even though he has no logically compelling reason to do so, other than what we call nature, which is not an idea. It's just an observation. On the contrary, if chance or random probabilities were running the show, it would be more reasonable to assume that tomorrow will be utterly unpredictable. The conviction that nature will continue to function as it did today is only logically compelling when it is based on the knowledge that there really is a master of the world. When we in fact believe in a God who designed the world and he gave the world a nature, is it then reasonable for someone to say the sun will rise tomorrow? Because this is the nature that God put into the universe. But if it's randomness, that the sun randomly does, there are far more possibilities of what the sun can do tomorrow morning than just rise up as it does every day. Although more could be said on everything that was discussed above, and certain points could be explained further, because this could be a very long conversation, this should suffice and provide enough material for consideration and conclusion. For it is incorrect to maintain that the Creator's existence requires proof, while His creation itself exists beyond doubt, because in fact the opposite is true. Basically what he's saying is the opposite is true, is that God exists beyond doubt, and creation requires proof. Recent results of scientific research regarding the existence of the universe and the ways to describe it contradict each other in numerous areas and indeed leave room for major doubts. But the most serious, significant, and fundamental scientific doubt is as follows. Who can establish whether the perceived impression of the eyes, of the ears, or of the brain generally has any reality outside human sensation or thought? Okay, the Rebbe is jumping into a very deep philosophical discussion here, and we'll do our best with it. And he's basically challenging whether, because we see something or hear something, we can know that to be a fact. Maybe it's just my experience of it. I want to tell you something interesting, which you may know. Many studies have already proven that if you take 6 people and you show them the same event, they will tell you different details about what happened. That means they will describe a different type of event. They saw the exact same thing. You know why that is? That is because what we see is filtered through so many layers of our own past experiences and interpretations and feelings and meanings that the end result of what we experienced, we saw, is different than what someone else experienced in what they saw. And we will literally describe the facts, details, differently than another person. This has deeply been proven. You may know the very famous experiment they did. I forgot what it's called. You can find this video on YouTube where they show people a bunch of people playing basketball. And then after the people playing basketball, they ask you how many gorillas were there. They actually tell you to count how many times I think the basketball was bounced or something like that. So you're watching very intently. And then afterwards they ask you, okay, we have a question for you. You think they're going to ask you how many times was the basketball bounced. They ask how many gorillas did you see? And the answer is always no. None. Gorillas? What are you talking about, gorillas? There were 3 guys here bouncing basketballs. And then they say, let's replay the video. They replay the video. And suddenly you see two gorillas, guys dressed up in gorillas, walking right onto the screen slowly, and then going off the screen, and no one notices it. That's how strong our biases are. It's a phenomenal, you just do gorillas basketball or something on YouTube and you should find that video. Unfortunately, I ruined it a little bit for you because I already told you, so you're going to know what to look for. So it'll be hard for you, but you can try it with someone else in your family and you'll see the result. So this argument poses an insurmountable challenge to the truth of the world's existence, but in no way applies to the Creator, nor to the functional reality of event causation and universal order. For this, practically speaking, it doesn't matter whether there exists an independent reality or just the impression of such a reality. The primary consideration of the average person, and according to which he lives his whole life, is that for everything in this world there is a cause which acts from within or without. A further note of importance is that often human nature is such that when one is given a simple proof, it is difficult to accept because of its very simplicity. I'm going to expound on this in 1 minute. Such irrational rejection is unfortunate because it precludes any effect on personal behavior. While one of the foundations of our faith is in the universe's creator and director, as well as the stand at Sinai and the receiving of the Torah and His commandments, is that the quality of a person's deed is what matters most. What the Rebbe is saying is like this. Sometimes, when you give a person a simple proof, they no, it's too simple. We need to be more sophisticated. Ironically, God in spiritual literature is often referred to as pshitut. Pshitut means simplicity. In fact, the better someone understands a subject, the more simply they can explain it. That's why we say, there's a saying in Yiddish, which is really a quasi-Yiddish Hebrew, as is felt in hasbara, felt in havana, which means if you cannot explain it well, you don't understand it well. Meaning it very often, the reason why people can't explain an idea well is because they don't really grasp it well. When a person gets to the very root, the essence, the depth of an idea, they understand it really well and they can explain it very simply because they can get more to the core of it. And therefore, someone can say, what? So you tell me the proof of God is that just like a factory where there are so many different parts works together, that's how we know there's a God. Too simple. No, it's not too simple. It is very simple. It's very simple. That's exactly right. It doesn't have to be sophisticated. I know we're talking about God. It doesn't have to be sophisticated. If a body, a single human, of which there are 8 billion humans today, right? Maybe there's more. If they're one single one of them is made up of 15 trillion cells that are working in harmony together so that they are the most sophisticated being in the world. The only way that can happen is if there was a being that orchestrated that. So the simplicity of the explanation should not deter a person, is what the Rebbe is saying. And we have to realize something, that at the end of the day, a person's deeds is what matters most. It's our behavior, it's what we do that matters most. Did we hear the shofar or did we not? Right? Did we fast on Yom Kippur or did we not? Did we shake the lulav in Israel or did we not? That is really bottom line. What's important, and that's why God commands us to do all of these things. And it's simple that God commanded us because there were 3 million of our ancestors that stood at Mount Sinai and all heard it, and no one questioned or said that they had a different experience. Despite what I just shared about when multiple people experience something, normally they experience something very different. The Rebbe concludes this letter. I will be pleased to hear responses to all of the above, and as mentioned in the enclosed letter, I hope they will feel completely free to present their opinions, even if they disagree with what is written above. Does anyone have any questions, comments, or rebuttals? We're good? Or are we just stunned? Okay, I guess everyone's good. Okay, we're going to we'll do another letter. I think we can get another letter in, everyone, okay? Yes.
Question. Well, you just touched on it. How do you know that those 3 million or 600,000 men or whatever aren't interpreting what they saw differently?
One of the ways that we know that is from the very fact that they all experienced the exact same thing. So the nature of humans, especially of Jews, but the nature of humans is that we don't experience the same thing. So the fact that they did, that actually is proof. Does that make sense? That is completely abnormal. It's completely abnormal. So such an abnormality that 3 million people experienced the exact same thing tells you how true it was. That God made this as clear as possible to them. By the way, I'll just add that the reason why in the Torah it says this, I'm not using the Torah to prove that the Torah is true, but I'm just demonstrating that one of the things that the Jews experienced when they were at Mount Sinai before the Ten Commandments began, where they actually had revelation, God spoke. God said to Moses, I am speaking to you in front of them so that they all know that you are truly a prophet who I speak to. Moses is the greatest prophet that ever lived. And the reason why God made him the greatest prophet that ever lived not only in that he was a great prophet, because he experienced prophecy differently than all other prophets, but also that he was verified in front of every Jew that was living. Because God spoke to Moses in earshot of all of them, so that they will all know that Moses is a true prophet, the one who gives the Torah. In other words, God deliberately created this scope of revelation which was wholesome, that every Jew experienced, as opposed to any other religion where, Mr. J says that he and 4 of his disciples had a revelation. Muhammad says that he sat behind a mountain and had a revelation. John Smith from the Mormons said that he was driving in upstate New York and he saw something. It's all singular claims. There's no way to prove any of that. And the Jewish claim is not even a claim. It's a historical event and a historical fact, because it's the most proven fact of all of history. There was an entire nation that experienced it exactly together as one. There was never a moment that an entire nation experienced an event together, because most events that we experience are physical events, and they take place in a particular time and at a particular place, where the entire nation isn't even there. This was an experience where the entire nation of the Jewish people, without a single person missing, experienced it. Let's do any other questions? Now, I do want to acknowledge that our intellectual minds still sometimes struggle with this, because we still want empirical proof. But that happened 3,300 and something years ago. Right? How do I know it actually happened? Right? That's the mind getting in the way of faith, right? But we don't do that with many other things. You never got onto a plane and said, but how do I know that the pilot is proven, is truly a pilot? We're trusting the airline. I mean, the airline can't even get their time straight. And you're trusting the pilot? But we do, right? I'm not saying we shouldn't, right? I trust the pilot also, right? The good news is the pilot's in the same club, so that's a good reason to trust the pilot. If we go down, he goes down. But the point being that we don't ask for empirical proof in most things in life. And it so happens that Mount Sinai is empirically proven. Any other questions or comments? Okay, I'm going to do one more letter. I know we're going to go a few minutes over time because we got delayed at the start. So let's do this one more letter. How to dispel anxiety and worry. 1964. Greeting and blessing. This is to acknowledge receipt of your letter with an enclosure in which you write about your problem of acute anxiety and ask my advice. The best and most effective thing to do in a situation such as yours is to study thoroughly those sections and chapters in our sacred books where the matter of divine providence and bitachon, trust in divine providence, in God who orchestrates everything, are discussed. Such as Chovas Halvavos, which is the duties of the heart, or the gate of trust, which we just finished studying last year. Shar HaBitachon, that's the gate of trust, and similar. It is well to keep in mind those chapters and verses in Tehillim. You should also keep in mind the chapters and verses in Psalms which speak of these subjects, as well as the Midrashim and interpretations of our sages on them. These things should be studied with such depth that they should become a part of one's thinking. One has to study it over and over and think about it deeply until it becomes the way that you think, the way you experience life. In this way, there will be no room left for any kind of anxiety or worry. And as King David said in Tehillim, God is with me, I shall not fear. What can man do unto me? Meaning that if something happens to me, I know that God is orchestrating this. That's divine providence. And therefore I don't worry about it. There's nothing to worry about. On the contrary, this is something that God wants me to work with. A circumstance he wants me to work with. Again, I'm going to differentiate and say that there is what happens to us and there's what we choose to do. So what we choose to do, we have choice to do. We have responsibility there. But what happens to us, straight up divine providence. And by the way, to add to that, without getting too deeply into the subject, even once we have chosen to do something, once we choose to do something and do it, then it happened to us at this point. And that also becomes divine providence, even if it was a bad choice, but ultimately now in hindsight becomes divine providence. That we went through this negative experience or whatever it may be. As you well know, so if you take, before we continue, whatever it is that causes anxiety, think about the situation that causes you anxiety. If we were to truly, I have plenty of anxiety too, right? But in the times that I actually remind myself and get very clear, not just remind myself, but get very clear that this is the situation that God wants me to deal with, it takes away my anxiety. It's no longer something to be anxious about. It's my mission. As you well know, the matter of Hashgacha Pratis, of divine providence, is the basis of true monotheism. A concept which to us means not only that God is one, but that there is oneness in the whole of nature. In other words, the whole universe has one supreme being, who not only is the creator of everything, but also is the master, continually supervising everything, every detail of his handiwork. The corollary of this is that there cannot be a single point in the whole order of the world which is separate from the supreme being. He's making a major statement, and he's saying that there's not a single thing or moment that is separate from God, or in any way not subject to his control. There's not a single thing that is not subject to God's control. At the same time, it's obvious that the supreme being is also the essence of perfection and goodness, and although many things in the world seem imperfect and require completion or perfection, there can be no doubt that there is a perfect order in the world, even the lowest in the scale of creation. I mean, just because there are things that need perfection, which is part of our mission in this world, to bring perfection to them, at the same time, everything is still operating in perfect order. It just needs to be heightened to a higher level. And even the lowest of the scale of creation, namely the inanimate things, like a stone, display wonderful perfection and symmetry, as can be seen from the atoms and molecules of inorganic matter. Just take inorganic matter, take a stone, and if one takes it under a microscope and observes the atoms and the molecules and how they operate in perfect harmony and symmetry for this stone to be a solid mass, we can clearly see that there is a divine being orchestrating everything. Hence, the conclusion must be that even those things which require completion are also part of the perfect order and necessary for the fulfillment of the good, as all this is explained at length in the teachings of Hasidus. It is explained that that in order for a man to attain perfection, it's necessary that he should also have the feeling that he is not only on the receiving end, but also a contributor, and according to the expression of our sages of blessed memory, a partner in the creation. This is why many things have been left in the world for him to improve and perfect. The Rebbe is saying a very important psychological idea, as well as a spiritual idea, and that is, a human being is never satisfied unless a human being is producing. And producing means that there is something that is a challenge I have in front of me, and I work hard to produce. If a person is not doing that, they will not feel meaning in life. They will not feel fulfilled. When we struggle to deal with certain things in life, we have to realize that is meaningful. That gives us meaning. And we should know that. We should know that from our own experience. But sometimes we have to be reminded of it when the challenges are a little bit more difficult. That's why God doesn't give us a free ride in this world. He gives us responsibility. And he holds us accountable to that responsibility. That's the biggest gift he can give us. I also want to make the further observation, and this is also essential, that there is really no basis for anxiety at any time, and as you yourself mentioned in your letter, that you find no reason for it. Even in such cases where you think you know the reason for your anxiety, the reason is undoubtedly imaginary, or at any rate, not the real cause. For the real cause is that one's daily life is not in complete harmony with the true essence of a Jew. He's saying, what is the real cause for anxiety? A misalignment between my daily life and my true essence as a Jew. I want you to hear this. This is a powerful diagnosis that is true for every one of us. Hopefully none of us have acute anxiety, just the normal human anxiety, but hopefully we'll diminish that with time. It comes from one thing. There's a misalignment. I'll tell you something that I've experienced most powerfully in the last year. I've experienced this in a very powerful way. There are things that we all seek in life. We want health. We want comfort. We want relaxation. We want money. All of these things are normal things that all normal human beings seek consciously, subconsciously, probably these things more consciously. When I invest my time not in all of those things, although all of them are important, they're all needs, they're all necessary, right? But a lot of times we invest ourselves far too much in them. And when I don't invest myself in that, but I invest myself in what I know is true for me, and that is me bringing inspiration to other Jews, I feel much happier, much more fulfilled, and I can be literally on a high from it. And when I don't do that, I don't feel that way. And the reason why is for one reason. It's because in those times, in those days, or in those moments, I have an alignment between my outer self and my inner self. And when I have that harmony, it's wonderful. I'm at peace and I'm exhilarated. It's tremendous. Of course, there's a consistency. When there's a misalignment between how I live my life and what I know to be true, that means, and sometimes that knowing is a subconscious knowing, because we all have the subconscious knowing because we have the soul. And we have some conscious knowing. I mean, if you take this class, you have a high level of conscious knowing, right? So we know that. And when there's misalignment, there's an unspoken or unconscious discomfort and anxiety that comes from that. So let me get to that again. For the real cause is that one's daily life is not in complete harmony with the true essence of a Jew. In such a case, it's impossible not to have an awkward feeling that things do not seem to fit somehow. And it is this disharmony which is at the bottom of the anxiety, and it is in proportion to the discrepancy between his way of life and his true natural self. If you ever been trying to figure out your anxiety, it was just figured out for you. The Rebbe just gave it to you. Everybody recognizes that anxiety has to do with the psyche. But in the case of a Jew, the so-called psyche is really the neshama. Some Jews have a particularly sensitive soul. This is true. There are some people who are more sensitive than others. In which case, the above-mentioned disharmony would create a greater anxiety. And therefore, some people, of course, they're so sensitive, even a little bit of disharmony creates tremendous anxiety, emotional discomfort. Whereas there's another person who's not naturally as sensitive, so they get less anxiety from the same disharmony. In such a case, even subtle and minor infractions of dikduke mitzvah, it means that just minor elements of a mitzvah, would create anxiety. But even in the case of an ordinary soul, of the average Jew, there must inevitably be created some anxiety if there's a failure to observe the fundamental mitzvahs. It is natural that the person will have some anxiety. It's very possible that the above may have a bearing on your situation. So the Rebbe is suggesting, he's saying it's possible that this may be what's behind your anxiety. If this is so, then all that is necessary is to rectify matters. He says, if so, that's simple. Not easy necessarily, but simple. It's simple. What should you do? Bring the daily life. All you have to do is rectify matters and bring the daily life and conduct into complete harmony with the essence of the soul. Harmonize your day-to-day life more and more with your soul through strict adherence to the Torah and mitzvos. Then the symptoms will disappear of themselves. It is necessary to mention also It's necessary to mention also that in your case, where your position gives you a great deal of influence on your environment, this must be a person who has influence on their environment. Your influence is an integral part of your harmonious life, and it's therefore essential that your influence too should be in harmony with the Torah and mitzvahs in the fullest measure. If you're a person who can have influence, that's part of you being in harmony with yourself, of having that influence, not shying away from it. I suggest that you should also have the mezuzahs on your home checked, as also your tefillin. So obviously this guy was a man, and therefore before putting on your tefillin every weekday, to put aside a small coin for tzedakah. Hoping to hear good news from you in regard to all matters discussed above, and then we have blessing, and then we have a P.S. As for the question of seeing me personally in connection with this year's occurrence, the calendar of appointments is filled to capacity for a long time in advance, but the important thing is that it is not at all necessary for you to take the trouble and time to see me personally, as much as all I could tell you is what I wrote to you above. Basically, what the Rebbe concludes with, which I want to make a point of saying, is the Rebbe is saying that I know you want to meet me. The Rebbe said my schedule is full for a very long time. But the Rebbe says to him, you don't need to meet me. You just need to do what you need to do. Sometimes we're looking for the guru, the psychologist, the coach, the expert, the person who's going to really show us. But usually we don't really need, obviously those people can always help, but what we really need is simply to do what we need to do. And then the problems get resolved. Very good, everyone. Have a wonderful day. Have an easy fast. And I hope you'll be joining us in Yom Kippur if you're local. And we are going to be resuming, I think it's October 27th. And I also want to encourage you to take our upcoming JLI course this fall, which is called the Kabbalah of Meaning, which is going to be a super meaningful course and really enhance your life, because when we have meaning, our life is rich. That's also beginning on October 27th, on Monday evening. And if you're going to be coming, then I want to encourage you also to gift a friend of yours with the gift of meaning as well, by encouraging them to come with you. And if they're a new friend that never came, you'll both get a 25% discount. So that always is always helps. So okay.
Will that class be available? The Monday evening class be available by Zoom?
Yes, it will. And for those, I want to let everyone know that someone gave us a very generous gift of $25,000 to install a whole new audio-visual system in the room where we give the class, which it hasn't been tested yet, I still have to test it, should make the Zoom, which we struggled with in the past, be streamlined, and also be able to record our classes properly, etc., etc. So we're very excited about that too.
It was good. I've watched the classes on Zoom, other than they've always been, hearing you is excellent. Hearing the questions for the audience is
that should be improved now. You should be able to hear all of the questions now.
What you said, it always works.
Yeah.
And there's somebody in mind who doesn't go out and meet.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yes.
Recording stopped. Is there a difference between a sensitive person and a not so sensitive person as far as religious or soul?
A sensitive and non-sensitive is a soul thing. It's not a religious thing. So we know, just like we know psychologically, and usually it's the same person. People psychologically can be very sensitive. Hashem gave them a much more sensitive soul. Sensitive souls, I'm going to make this statement because I believe this to be true. Sensitive souls, I feel, are a little bit more tormented in this world, but they have a gift which is very, very powerful. If they can work through that torment, because initially sensitive people often, their sensitivity plays out not only towards spiritual things, but it plays out in their relationships with other people. They get hurt easily. When we shift our sensitivity from being sensitive about ourselves to being sensitive to others and to God, so then we get less hurt, but we have a gift that we can give to other people because we're sensitive, that other people don't have because they're more coarse. So if you believe that you're a sensitive soul, you're gifted, but every gift comes with a development. It's not a free ride. You have to work through it to bring it out, to cultivate it.